John Tester.
Thank you much, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to beat you to the punch, but I want to welcome Secretary Wilkie and Dr. Lawrence and Dr. Stone and
I think you just did.
Mr. Rachowski to the hearing today. I look forward to learning from you today, and I want to thank your team and thank you for what you guys do every day. The chairman talked about access standards, and access standards will be talked about a lot today. We've talked about privatization. Nobody around this table, and I don't believe any of you want to see that happen. But it's something I'm very concerned about because the big boss talks about it all the time. And in the end, we need to make sure that, as the VSOs told us a couple weeks ago during joint House and Veterans Affairs Committee, they prefer the care that you guys provide. That's a good thing, okay? I think that's a very good thing. That means you guys are doing some things right, okay? And we'll talk about a few things you might not be doing so right today, and I'll apologize ahead of time, but the truth is that these are folks that have served our country, and we need to make sure we live up to the promises, as you well know, Mr. Secretary, the promises we made to them. Look, over the past few years, this committee's heard from the VA about what it needs to be successful. We've engaged with VSOs, as we did for the last couple of weeks, to see what they wanted in their VA. And I will tell you, this committee listened and we acted, leading the way on a number of monumental reforms that, quite frankly, a lot of people didn't think we could ever get done, but we did last Congress on behalf of our nation's veterans. This is an important part of our job, providing you, the VA, with the tools that you need to do your job. Yeah. Equally critically, though, is your job is deciding how the new authorities and the resources are executed and utilized, and that is where, as I've said already, my concern tend to lie. In my view, the level of commitment from Congress to address healthcare vacancies and critical infrastructure needs at the VA needs to be matched by the department. I've talked about my parochial interest in Montana, and I'm going to talk about it again today, Fort Harrison. By the way, if you run back about 15 years, it was one of the top VA facilities in the country. Fort Harrison today has one primary care physician, a part-time doctor who sees a handful of patients. I've got CBOCs in Montana, as you know, Mr. Secretary, with no primary care doctors, no advanced primary care clinicians, and where that care is only provided through telehealth. Now, I'm going to tell you, telehealth's a great innovation, and it does some great things with folks that have mental health issues, but it cannot replace all types of health care. So you get the frustration that VA primary focus seems to be expanding eligibility and investments into community care, and I don't want it to be at the expense of capacity building initiatives. I'm going to say that again. I don't want our investments in community care to be at the expense of capacity building initiatives. As you and I have discussed, there's certainly a role for the private sector, especially in a rural state like Montana. I'm sure Senator Sullivan would agree, in Alaska and other states too. But I think we've got to be careful that we don't take the department down a dangerous path. When it comes to veterans, you can outsource the care, but you can't outsource the responsibility. And when they're sent into community care, without first knowing if that care can be provided in a timely manner and if it's quality care, we're going to pay the price for that later. Because quite frankly, the veteran's going to come back and say why. So I think we need to hold our VA providers to one set of standards and community care providers to that same set of standards. After all, none of us want a flood of veterans going to community care if it has a lower quality and less timely. And we certainly can't head down a path without a firm grasp on how much it's going to cost the American taxpayer. For example, we received multiple estimates from the department on how much it would cost to implement access standards in the month leading up to the budget request. None of those estimates matched the number that finally appeared in the budget request. And as we go forth, I'd like you to clarify that, if you could, why that is. So it's not clear how that estimate came about. It's also not clear whether the technology that you need to implement this program, such as a decision support tool, will be ready in time for implementation. I've been receiving conflicting reports about the readiness of this tool. I'm frustrated we continue to hear about IT solutions that may not be executed properly. There's a huge chunk of money in this budget for IT. If it's not spent properly, we've wasted taxpayer dollars and we haven't delivered the services to our veterans that they've earned. As you know, the VA has struggled for many years in the field of IT, earning a place on the GAO's high-risk list this year again. I recently had a great meeting with Jim Graffer, but there's no OIT representation from the department here today. And so I hope that's not a reflection of how this issue is being prioritized. I know the table's short, so you have to pick and choose. But we have seen how flawed IT rollouts impact veterans and the progress the VA is making on replacing an antiquated system that can't afford to be plagued with shortcuts. By the way, we are here today with the mission program as a direct result of IT failures in Arizona. So this is a big thing. We need to work. You've got a great team around you, Mr. Secretary. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think you're a great guy. I think you're the right guy for this job, and I'm glad you're there. But we need to find out the details of this budget. And as we move forward, I certainly do not want to see VA care dollars transferred to community care because we ran out of money in the community care budget. So with that, I would just say thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to this hearing.
Senator Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume that means I can just expand the time that I used.
It means you have to behave.
Definitely. Oh, I have to behave, damn it. Thank you all for being here once again. I hesitate to talk history with somebody who probably knows history far better than I do, especially military history. But nonetheless, this is pretty elementary. In the 1930s, this country did not want to go to war. President Roosevelt turned our car factories into airplane manufacturing and prepared for war, and then came the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and we were ready for war. Pretty simple, pretty ingenious. Everybody on this committee, I believe, has said no privatization, and all the VSOs have said no privatization. The president has said something different. You have said no privatization, and your staff has also said that. But as the questions are asked here today, and I've talked about our vacancies in Montana, Manchin talked about his vacancies, his facilities that needed improvement. Blumenthal talked about West Haven that was 1/3 capacity. Even Senator Moran, even though he's not mad about it, is talking about a CBOC that's going to be closed because of lack of staffing. Everything that I'm hearing and everything I'm seeing says something different. And then I look at the budget, and you had said earlier that you needed $60 billion in capital investments. And the budget request for major and minor construction was decreased by 43% for major construction and 50% for minor construction. And we're talking about the needs that are out there. And by the way, we can go down the list in Montana. It's pretty reflective. And I was at the meeting 6 days ago when you guys said you can't get the money out the door, but nonetheless, you talked about $60 billion in capital expenditures, and we're reducing those accounts by 40 and 50%. Putting all that together, how can we justify that?
So, Senator Tester, I could probably shed some light on that. First, let me say, as a department CFO, I feel dirty not asking for more money, to be honest. But
the issue isn't just asking for more money. I don't care if you ask for more money, but if you got $60 billion in needs over the next 5 years, and we're reducing those same accounts that will meet those capital expenditures, something doesn't jive, that's all.
So let me explain. And so that was being a little bit facetious. The fact of the matter is we do have a requirement, there's no question. We have older facilities and we have a substantial facility requirement. As you know, we had a substantial plus up in 18 and 19. The fact of the matter is that we sort of very quickly executed our shovel-ready projects, and they are in the works. And we are at a point now, when you sort of divide the amount of money we have in the works by the number of facilities, we have about 19 to 20 projects per facility going, and they have limited capacity in a lot of areas of moving clinics around, moving people around. And we're now hearing from a number of facilities, they have actually some shovel-ready projects they just can't execute because it's too disruptive. We're going to end up carrying some of that money forward. From 19 into 20, we're going to carry about $1 billion of the plus up in NRM. We're also going to carry some minor construction money forward.
Gotcha. So I'm going to do some quick math for you, not that you don't know this already. You divide 60 by 5, it's $12 billion a year. And if that need is out there and we can't execute the amount of money we've got so far, how do we not privatize the VA?
Well, we don't privatize the VA because we still have the largest healthcare system in the country.
I got it.
170 hospitals.
Yep.
And our veterans are voting with their feet. Let me just say, this is not a libertarian VA. If it were, I would be giving myself a card that says veteran, and I go out in the private sector and get anything I want.
I hear it.
That is not happening. And again, I fall back, not on anecdote, but on the stats. Our
Yes.
veterans are happy. They're going where people speak their language and their culture. I support that, and this committee supports it.
Mr. Secretary, and I agree with you, but I go back to the example of history. If we're short on manpower, if our facilities are short and substandard, if we're not making the HVAC additions that we need to do, eventually those veterans who are going to the VA are going to say, nope, not anymore.
Well, you gave me this committee gave me the answer.
Yes.
And that is the market assessments.
Yes.
And then the Asset Infrastructure Review Committee, which does exactly what you said. And I think I'm going to come to you and ask to accelerate the beginning of that commission.
Of the AIR Act?
Yes, so that it moves more rapidly than the timeline that this committee has given it.
And really quick, just, and I don't have a problem with that, can you give me an idea on how quick, because it's set to go into effect 2021 or 2022? Okay.
And I would like to do that earlier because our market assessments are already underway.
I would love to visit with you about that moving forward. Okay. And now we have Senator Bozeman.